Have you ever caught yourself staring out the window, lost in thought, imagining something that doesn't exist yet, or reliving a memory that never quite fades? You weren't being lazy, you were daydreaming, and believe it or not, your brain was doing something incredibly intelligent. In this sleepy journey, we'll gently explore why your wandering mind might be one of the most powerful tools you have. So before we begin, what do you usually daydream about? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know what your mind drifts toward when the world grows quiet. Now, let your thoughts float, your breathing slow, and your mind relax as we enter the quiet wonderland of daydreaming. When your mind begins to drift, perhaps while watching raindrops trail down a window or while listening to the soft ticking of a clock, something remarkable begins to happen inside your brain. Though it may feel like you've switched off, as if your awareness is taking a break from the outside world, your brain is far from idle. In fact, it's entering one of its most energetically active and mysterious states. Scientists call this process spontaneous cognition, but you might know it simply as daydreaming. In those gentle moments of mental wandering, your brain shifts away from the outside world and turns inward. This shift is so natural that it often happens without your permission, as though the brain itself longs to explore its own hidden landscapes. You may find yourself thinking about the past, imagining a future moment, revisiting a conversation, or even slipping into a completely made-up scene where the rules of reality quietly dissolve. And while all this unfolds, it feels effortless. You aren't directing your thoughts like a stern conductor. You're simply observing them, floating with them, as if your mind has set sail on a quiet stream. Deep inside your head, something fascinating begins to stir. Brain imaging studies reveal that when you're no longer focused on a task, a specific network of regions in your brain lights up with activity. It's called the default mode network, and it pulses with energy when you're at rest. It's almost as if the brain, when left alone, reverts to its favorite pastime, thinking about thoughts, about yourself, your relationships, your story, and your place in the world. In this state, your attention is no longer tied to the external environment. Instead, it loops inward, circling through memories, feelings, fantasies, fears, and dreams. This gentle wandering is different from the mental noise we associate with distraction. Distraction is sharp, restless, filled with alerts and interruptions. Daydreaming, in contrast, is soft and fluid. It doesn't demand your attention, it invites it. Like fog rolling over a quiet field, it gently obscures the present moment while revealing something deeper and more personal beneath the surface. And unlike distractions that fracture your attention, daydreaming often integrates your thoughts, blending ideas together in ways that wouldn't happen through logical planning alone. Your brain begins to stitch together pieces of memory, experience, imagination, and emotion, a mental quilt of sorts, woven from the fragments of your inner world. In doing so, it creates meaning. Perhaps that's why so many people find clarity in the moments between doing, during a shower, a walk, or while lying still in bed. Your thoughts aren't forced in these moments. They're free to explore what matters, what hurts, what you want, and what you fear. Free to imagine yourself in places you've never been, saying things you've never said, becoming someone you're not, or perhaps someone you've always wanted to be. Children do this constantly. They slip into pretend worlds effortlessly, holding conversations with imaginary friends, creating entire universes with nothing but silence and thought. But adults too return to this mental playground. Sometimes, without realizing it, they rehearse speeches they'll never give, rewrite arguments from years ago, or live out beautiful scenes that exist only in the warm corners of their imagination. These imagined experiences can feel just as real, emotionally, neurologically, as anything grounded in fact. What's most surprising is that this quiet mental drifting doesn't just soothe the soul. It seems to make the brain smarter, more adaptive, more creative. Studies have shown that people who daydream more frequently tend to score higher on tests of creativity, problem solving, and even intelligence. Why? Because the brain, when freed from structure, learns to think beyond structure. It becomes better at making associations, at connecting the unconnected, at finding elegant solutions buried under noise. In other words, when your mind begins to wander, it might not be escaping reality. It might be preparing you for it. You're not wasting time. You're building something, slowly, quietly, inside yourself. A sense of identity, a story, a world. Inside your brain, beneath layers of neurons firing, electrical pulses flowing, and chemical messengers carrying their quiet whispers across synapses, lies a hidden network that only truly wakes up when the world around you begins to fade. This network does not flicker on when you're paying attention or performing a task. Instead, it waits patiently, like a shadow following behind your focus. And then, when you finally pause, when you close your eyes or stare off into the distance, it begins to glow. This is the default mode network, the quiet conductor of your inner world. For a long time, scientists believed that the brain worked like a machine, active only when doing something, idle when at rest. But something didn't quite add up. When people stopped working on a task, when they were supposedly doing nothing, brain scans lit up with unexpected activity. Not in the areas associated with problem solving or action, but in a completely different constellation of regions. It was as if the brain had a second personality, one that emerged only when the world grew quiet. This mysterious network links together several key regions of the brain, including the medial prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self-reflection and understanding others, the posterior cingulate cortex, which helps form memories and link them to emotion, and the angular gyrus, which contributes to language, imagination, and visual imagery. These regions form a kind of neural web, delicate but powerful, that stretches across your mind, quietly threading together your sense of identity, your memories, your emotions, and your imagined futures. When you daydream, this network comes alive. It hums gently beneath your conscious awareness, drawing connections between the past and present, between what you know and what you wonder. And the thoughts it produces are rarely linear. They are not like lines drawn on paper. They are like waves in a still lake, overlapping, drifting, expanding. One moment, you may be remembering the way the sunlight looked on a childhood morning. The next, you're imagining a conversation that's never happened. The default mode network doesn't separate these experiences. It blends them. It is here, in this quiet mode, that your sense of self begins to form more deeply. This is where you reflect on who you are, not who the world says you should be, but who you feel yourself to be when no one is watching. When your mind is free to wander without pressure, it begins to stitch together an invisible thread, a continuity of self. It asks quiet questions like, what kind of person am I? Or what do I truly want? And often, these answers come not through logic, but through a soft unfolding of thought, memory, and emotion that rises unannounced, like a dream. Surprisingly, this inner network also plays a major role in how you understand other people. When you imagine what someone else is feeling, when you simulate a conversation in your head, or try to guess what someone meant by a look or a word, the default mode network is guiding that process. It allows you to mentally step outside yourself and into the shoes of another, to play with perspectives, to build empathy. It is a kind of theater of the mind where roles shift and stories evolve, where you rehearse how to be human. And it doesn't stop at people. The default mode network is responsible for some of your most vivid and strange imaginings, the kinds of thoughts that float up without warning. What if I lived in a cabin in the mountains? What if I changed my life completely? What if I had said yes instead of no? These thoughts often have no immediate use. They aren't practical, but they are essential. They stretch the boundaries of who you think you are. They challenge the rigidity of your current reality. They give you permission to imagine something more. Strikingly, when this network is damaged or disrupted, whether through injury, illness, or certain mental conditions, people report a loss of inner depth. They feel disconnected from their past. Their ability to imagine the future diminishes. They become tethered to the present moment in a way that is not freeing, but suffocating. It becomes harder to remember who they were, harder to dream about who they might become. The silence inside becomes too quiet, almost empty. So, while the default mode network was once dismissed as background noise, as the brain doing nothing, we now understand it as one of the most important systems in the human mind. It doesn't just help you daydream, it helps you be, to have a self, to tell your own story, to live not just in the moment, but across the vast inner timeline of your life. It is the secret architecture behind the quiet world you visit when you're alone with your thoughts. And perhaps this is why, even in the busiest times, your brain still finds its way back to daydreaming. Because this network, quiet, slow, and unseen, is not a luxury. It is a necessity, a deep and ancient rhythm that gives shape to your thoughts, your hopes, and your sense of who you truly are. It's easy to mistake daydreaming for distraction. After all, both pull your attention away from the task at hand. Both can make you miss a line in a book, forget what someone just said, or lose your place in a sentence. But underneath the surface, these two mental states are not the same. In fact, they are deeply different, not only in how they feel, but in how your brain experiences them and in what they reveal about your inner world. Distraction is scattered. It pulls you outward, fragmenting your attention into smaller and smaller pieces. It's often triggered by something external, a notification, a noise, a sudden change in your environment. Distraction makes it harder to think clearly because it constantly demands your attention, switching your focus from one thing to another in rapid succession. It keeps the surface of your mind busy, but rarely gives it time to sink. Daydreaming, on the other hand, pulls you inward. Instead of reacting to the outside world, your brain begins to explore its own terrain. You start to drift, but the drift has a current, a natural flow. It doesn't demand anything of you. It simply opens a doorway. One moment you're in the present, and the next you're reliving a memory, or imagining an event that hasn't yet happened, or slipping into a scenario that may never come true. Yet in these moments, something important is happening. Your brain is reorganizing itself, quietly and with care. Researchers have found that different brain networks light up depending on whether you're being distracted or engaged in true mind wandering. Distraction typically activates sensory and attention systems, the parts of the brain involved in alertness, scanning, responding. It's like a radar dish constantly turning. Daydreaming, by contrast, lights up the default mode network, the system involved in self-reflection, imagination, and deep thought. While distraction breaks your focus, daydreaming builds a new kind of focus, one that's directed toward your inner world. There's also a difference in how each one feels. Distraction often leaves behind a kind of mental static, a fuzzy, restless sense that you've lost time or missed something. It can feel like your mind was pulled out of alignment. Daydreaming is usually gentler. It has a softness to it. Even if you come back from it slightly disoriented, there's often a residue of meaning, a lingering image or emotion that stays with you. You might not remember exactly what you were thinking, but you'll remember the feeling of having gone somewhere meaningful, somewhere private and slightly mysterious. This difference is crucial because it changes how we value our mental states. In a world that often prizes attention and productivity above all else, daydreaming can be misinterpreted as laziness or even failure. But that view is built on a misunderstanding. The belief that only externally focused thought is valuable. When you understand that daydreaming is not distraction, but a different kind of mental activity altogether, you begin to see its purpose. You begin to understand that allowing your mind to wander isn't weakness. It's a form of subtle intelligence. Daydreaming lets your brain process information in the background. Have you ever walked away from a problem, only to have the solution come to you hours later, unannounced, while doing something completely unrelated? That's not coincidence. That's the power of the mind when it's free to roam without pressure. In fact, studies show that people who take short breaks and allow their minds to wander often return to their tasks with sharper insight and renewed creativity. The mind uses daydreaming to sort, filter, and make sense of the world, not through logic, but through something deeper and more intuitive. This is why daydreaming often happens in repetitive or quiet environments. When you're walking a familiar path, staring into the distance, folding laundry, or listening to soft music. These moments don't fill your brain with new information. They open up space. They loosen the grip of immediate demands and allow deeper currents of thought to rise. Distraction, in contrast, usually happens in overstimulated spaces. Crowded timelines, loud environments, busy screens. It fills the mind until there's no room left for reflection. There is also something more personal about daydreaming. It reveals things that you might not know you're feeling. When the pressure to focus drops away, the truth often rises. You may suddenly remember someone you miss, or replay a moment you regret, or imagine a future you're too afraid to pursue in real life. Daydreaming gently lowers the walls we build around ourselves. It creates a private space where thoughts can unfold without judgment or interruption. Distraction doesn't do this. Distraction keeps the walls up. In fact, it adds more. The key then is to recognize when your mind is drifting for a reason and when it's just running away. It's not always easy to tell the difference, especially in a fast-moving world. But if you pay attention, you'll start to notice the signs. True daydreaming often feels expansive. soft, a little bit like floating. It's unhurried. It can feel like opening a book in your mind and watching the pages turn on their own. Distraction is more like flipping through channels, never staying long enough to understand the story. So while both states may take you away from the present, only one of them helps you come back with greater clarity. Distraction scatters your mind. Daydreaming gathers it. One leaves you more fragmented. The other leaves you, strangely, more whole. Throughout history, the greatest leaps in human thought have often come not from effort, but from ease. Not from long hours of direct concentration, but from the quiet, in-between moments when the mind is allowed to wander freely, to play, to drift, to connect the dots in silence. It's in this wandering that we find the birthplace of creativity. And surprisingly, it's in daydreaming, that gentle, meandering state of mind, where some of the most powerful sparks of imagination are struck. To understand how creativity and daydreaming are connected, imagine your brain not as a machine, but as a vast open landscape. In this space, thoughts are not lined up in neat rows, but scattered like seeds across a field. When you're focused on a specific task, you might pick up one thought and follow it directly. But when you begin to daydream, something different happens. Your mind begins to explore the entire field. It moves without rules or maps, floating from one idea to the next, allowing thoughts to brush up against each other in unexpected ways. These soft collisions between memory and fantasy, logic and intuition, are the very heart of creative thinking. Some of the most celebrated minds in history were known to rely on this kind of mental wandering. Albert Einstein, for instance, often described how his greatest insights came not while buried in calculations, but while imagining himself riding on a beam of light through space. This wasn't idle distraction. It was focused, vivid, imaginative daydreaming. It allowed him to think beyond the limits of current knowledge, beyond what was provable or accepted at the time. Without this ability to mentally drift into the unknown, his groundbreaking theories might never have taken shape. Virginia Woolf, the writer, spoke often of the stream of consciousness, the endless, shifting flow of inner thought that she captured in her prose. Her writing mimicked the feeling of daydreaming, unfiltered, flowing, sometimes illogical, yet deeply profound. She understood what many creatives have intuitively known, that the most honest ideas often rise not from forceful thinking, but from the quiet places just beneath awareness. Places where the mind isn't doing, but being. In daydreaming, your brain slips into a state of open monitoring. Instead of directing thought along a narrow path, it opens the doors to unrelated ideas, stored fragments of memory, bits of music you heard last week, a random sentence from a book you read as a child, an emotion that never quite had a name. These pieces don't seem to fit together at first, but in the space of a daydream, they often do. Connections form, patterns emerge. You may not realize it in the moment, but your mind is reshaping information, recombining it in novel ways, creating something new where there was once only a blur. This process is not chaotic, it's associative. Your brain uses what neuroscientists call semantic networks, webs of meaning, to move from one concept to another. Daydreaming stretches these networks by allowing far-flung ideas to meet. This is what leads to metaphors in poetry, to inventions in engineering, to melodies in music. Creativity, in many ways, is the ability to link what others haven't linked, and daydreaming offers the perfect environment for those links to form. Even more fascinating is that during moments of daydreaming, parts of your brain involved in executive function, planning, decision-making, organizing, stay active. That means your mind isn't just imagining random scenes for pleasure. It's testing them, evaluating them, playing with possibilities in a low-pressure, safe space. It's like rehearsing an idea in a theater where no one is watching. If the idea doesn't work, no harm is done. If it does work, it may blossom into something real. This is why many people experience their best ideas, not while trying to be creative, but when they're doing something repetitive or relaxing, taking a shower, walking through a park, driving a familiar route. These are the perfect moments for the mind to relax its grip and slip into a more fluid state, one where intuition, memory, and imagination can swirl together freely. The pressure disappears, and suddenly, ideas arise as if from nowhere. Daydreaming is also crucial for something called divergent thinking, the ability to generate many different solutions to a problem. Instead of fixating on a single answer, the daydreaming mind explores dozens. What if we did it this way? What if we turned it upside down? What if we started from the end instead of the beginning? This mental flexibility is the essence of innovation. It's what allows new perspectives to emerge. And without the gentle, quiet space of daydreaming, that kind of flexible thinking often becomes impossible. Children, of course, are experts at this. Give a child a few sticks, a patch of sunlight, and 10 minutes of silence, and they'll create a world. Their minds naturally default to play, to pretend, to possibility. But as we grow older, this instinct is often trained out of us. We're taught to stay focused, stay productive, stay grounded. Yet creativity does not thrive in tight spaces. It needs room. It needs stillness. It needs the floating world that daydreaming provides. And so, the next time your mind begins to wander, when you catch yourself drifting, imagining, constructing little fantasies with no immediate purpose, don't pull yourself back too quickly. Don't dismiss it as wasted time. Instead, see it as a doorway opening, a space where something new might be waiting, something beautiful, something you didn't know you were capable of imagining. In that silent, meandering landscape, creativity quietly awakens, not with a shout, but with a whisper. Imagine for a moment that your thoughts are like stepping stones across a vast and quiet lake. As you daydream, your mind begins to move from one stone to another, sometimes stepping back into the past, sometimes leaping forward into a place that hasn't happened yet, a place that might never happen. This gentle shifting through time, this silent movement between memory and possibility is something your brain does with stunning ease. And it is during daydreaming that this unique ability, called mental time travel, comes most alive. Mental time travel is not about clocks or calendars. It's about the deeply human ability to experience time without physically moving through it. In one quiet moment, your mind can transport you to the warmth of a summer afternoon from 10 years ago, where the air smelled like sunlight and the laughter of someone you once loved echoed through your memory. And in the very next moment, you might be imagining a version of yourself 5 years from now. Older, maybe wiser, standing somewhere you've never been, doing something you've never done. This isn't fiction. It's a simulation, a deeply personal, emotional, and intelligent act that helps you make sense of your life. What makes this ability so remarkable is that your brain doesn't simply recall the past or predict the future in abstract terms. It relives these moments. When you think back to a memory, especially one wrapped in emotion, your brain reactivates the same neural pathways that were active during the original experience. The body may remain still, but the mind feels. The heart beats a little faster. The face softens. A scent, a texture, a sound might rise from nowhere. This is not imagination as decoration. It's imagination as time travel. The same thing happens when you look forward. Imagining the future uses many of the same regions in the brain as remembering the past. This overlapping network allows you to simulate different outcomes, test scenarios, and prepare for what might be coming. It's a mental rehearsal, and it's essential for survival. Daydreaming, then, is not a passive indulgence. It's a vital skill. It lets you mentally stretch out timelines, try on possibilities, make plans, and envision a better path. This is one reason daydreaming often becomes more vivid during transitional moments in life. When you're about to change jobs, move to a new city, end a relationship, or start something new. The mind becomes naturally drawn toward both the past and the future, like a compass searching for direction. You may revisit old choices, wondering what might have been. At the same time, you might leap ahead, imagining what could happen next, rehearsing outcomes over and over again. This process is not about escaping the present. It's about making sense of it. And the beauty of daydreaming is that it allows this time travel without boundaries. You are not limited to what is likely. You can drift into ideal futures, dreamlike scenes, impossible versions of reality. What if you had taken that train? What if you had said yes instead of no? What if you hadn't been afraid that day? These questions often have no answers, but they have meaning. They shape how you see yourself. They help you integrate your experiences, turning raw memory into understanding and raw hope into something that feels real enough to strive toward. Daydreaming also gives you the freedom to imagine futures in which you've healed, grown, forgiven, changed. It lets you run scenarios where you find peace with someone, accomplish something difficult, or live more courageously. These imagined futures can become emotional reference points, internal beacons that guide your actions. The more vividly you daydream about becoming the person you wish to be, the more your brain begins to map the path to that version of yourself. Interestingly, this form of mental time travel isn't always conscious. Sometimes it happens in a whisper, just beneath the surface of awareness. You might be staring at the wall, seemingly doing nothing, when suddenly you're back in a childhood home, sitting on the floor, hearing the distant hum of a television, remembering how small everything seemed. Or maybe you're seeing yourself years from now, sitting in a place that doesn't exist yet, talking to people who haven't entered your life. These mental images feel real. They carry weight, and though they pass quickly, they can leave behind traces, emotional fingerprints that influence how you think, feel, and act. This process also has a protective function. When life becomes difficult or uncertain, daydreaming offers a soft place to land. It allows you to escape, not in a shallow way, but in a way that offers clarity. You might revisit a moment of strength from your past to remind yourself of your resilience. Or you might imagine a future in which things have resolved, not to deny reality, but to comfort yourself in the storm. These inner journeys become tools for emotional regulation, helping you stay centered even when the world feels chaotic. And there's another layer. When you daydream, you don't just travel through time, you rewrite it. You can reinterpret painful events, offering yourself new perspectives. You can reimagine moments with compassion, or create better endings to memories that haunt you. While you cannot change what happened, you can change how you hold what happened. That alone can shift the way you live now. So much of who you are is shaped by your relationship to time, how you remember your past, how you imagine your future. And in this way, daydreaming becomes more than just a mental pastime. It becomes a way of maintaining a cohesive identity, a way of stitching together the fragments of your life into a single, continuous thread. You are not just a being in the present. You are a being made of memory and hope, of what has been and what could be. And when your mind begins to wander, it is not losing time. It is traveling through it, with purpose, with tenderness, and with the quiet power of imagination. Deep within the quiet moments of daydreaming, something subtle but profound begins to unfold. As your mind drifts away from the noise of the world, from deadlines, conversations, screens, and routines, it turns inward and begins to explore a space that is entirely yours. This is not just the place where memories live or fantasies unfold. It is something much more personal. It is where your inner world takes shape. And with each passing moment of mental wandering, you begin to build and rebuild something essential: your sense of self. This inner world isn't made of stone or wood, but of thoughts, feelings, images, voices, hopes, fears, and half-formed ideas. It's a landscape that stretches far beyond what anyone else can see. A place only you can access, where your private stories play out in silence. Daydreaming is the bridge that carries you into this space. It opens the door to a theater of the mind, where you are not just the audience, but the writer, the actor, the director, and the narrator. Here, you explore who you are, who you've been, and who you might become. In daily life, we are often consumed with the external, with how we appear, how we're perceived, what we're achieving. But the inner world cares little for these things. In this quieter, more fluid space, the question isn't, what are you doing? But what are you becoming? And daydreaming helps answer that question, not through logic or analysis, but through feeling, intuition, and imagination. When you allow yourself to drift, your brain begins to connect deeply personal material, fragments of your childhood, moments of joy or embarrassment, your longings, your regrets. These moments may arise without warning, a memory of the first time someone truly listened to you, or an old dream you once had but abandoned. As these pieces surface, your brain doesn't just observe them, it works with them. It arranges them, rearranges them, weaves them into narratives. Over time, these narratives begin to form the foundation of your identity. Who you are is not a fixed point. It's a living, breathing story, one that evolves every day, and one that is shaped profoundly by the invisible work your mind does when it wanders. In the space of a single daydream, you might revisit who you were 10 years ago, imagine who you might be 10 years from now, and confront something about yourself that you haven't dared to say out loud. These gentle mental shifts help solidify your internal landscape, giving it depth, meaning, and cohesion. It's in this quiet space that you also begin to develop something else: self-understanding. When you are no longer performing for the world, you begin to see yourself more clearly. You notice patterns in your thinking. You sense unspoken fears. You realize which desires return again and again, no matter how many times you've pushed them aside. These insights rarely arrive through conscious effort. They emerge naturally, as if rising through still water. And in their wake, you are changed. Subtly, quietly, but lastingly. Daydreaming also allows for the exploration of alternative selves, versions of you that never were, but might have been. You might imagine yourself living a different life, making different choices, following a different path. These imagined versions are not lies. They are reflections of your potential, of the many paths hidden within you. Exploring them doesn't mean you are discontent. It means you are curious about who you are and who you might still become. And in imagining these other versions of yourself, you gain a better understanding of the one you are now. This kind of exploration is deeply comforting because it allows for expansion. It reminds you that you are not trapped by your past or defined by your circumstances. In the mind's quiet spaces, you can be brave. You can say the things you're afraid to say. You can imagine healing from pain you've carried for years. You can try on new beliefs, new values, new dreams, not to abandon yourself, but to see which parts of you still feel true and which parts were never truly yours to begin with. The inner world created through daydreaming also acts as a sanctuary. It's a place you can return to when the outer world becomes too much. When you feel overwhelmed, lonely, or disconnected, the mind provides a space that is familiar, safe, and entirely your own. Here, you can replay a comforting memory, imagine someone you love sitting beside you, or simply drift through scenes of calm and beauty. These aren't escapes. They're forms of restoration. In this space, your nervous system relaxes, your breathing slows, and your emotional equilibrium begins to return. As you visit this inner world more often, through conscious reflection or spontaneous daydreaming, you begin to trust it. It becomes less abstract and more vivid, more real. You recognize its contours, the feelings that come and go, the patterns that repeat, the truths that quietly insist on being heard. You begin to notice that some thoughts comfort you, while others challenge you. Some memories nourish you, while others ask to be released. This awareness is not intellectual, it's emotional. It's something you feel, and it becomes a form of internal guidance. Over time, this deep connection to your inner world changes how you relate to the outer one. You start making choices that align more closely with your true self, because you've taken the time to understand who that self is. You recognize when something feels wrong, not because someone told you so, but because you can sense the dissonance within. You become more attuned to your own emotional language, the subtle signals that tell you what you need, what you fear, what you love. Daydreaming, then, is not a luxury or a distraction. It is the quiet act of self-construction. Each time your mind drifts inward, it gathers materials, memories, desires, questions, dreams, and begins to build. Not walls but windows, not masks but mirrors. Through these quiet windows and soft reflections, you begin to understand what it means to be you. not just in the world, but in your own eyes. And the more you return to this space, the more you realize that your inner world is not fixed. It is alive. It is waiting. And each time you enter it, it changes you, not loudly, not suddenly, but in the gentle way that water shapes stone, with patience and quiet strength. There is a peculiar kind of wisdom in what the brain chooses to do when it isn't being told what to do. In those quiet moments, when you're not answering a question, not checking a list, not solving a problem or watching the clock, your mind begins to stir in ways that are both subtle and astonishing. Without your conscious direction, it starts to revisit thoughts you've left unfinished. It begins to organize emotions you've ignored, reconsider decisions you've made, and, perhaps most beautifully, it starts solving problems in the background, like a quiet engine running beneath the surface. This is one of the hidden gifts of daydreaming. It turns your mind into a soft, tireless problem solver, without pressure, without stress, without deadlines. And yet, it often delivers something more profound than hours of focused effort ever could. While the conscious part of your brain rests, the unconscious part gets to work, rearranging information, testing scenarios, and seeking patterns in the shadows of your awareness. Have you ever had a moment when a solution just appeared out of nowhere? Maybe while you were brushing your teeth, walking down a hallway, or simply staring out a window. 1 second, there was nothing. And then suddenly, there was clarity, a new idea, a better path, a missing piece falling into place. This is not coincidence. This is the quiet work of the wandering mind, a part of your cognitive life that thrives when you are least focused, when your attention is loose and free-floating. The brain is not a machine that turns off when you're idle. It's more like a garden, with thoughts and emotions growing silently beneath the surface, even when you're not aware of them. Daydreaming is the sunlight and space that allows those inner processes to unfold. While you may appear still on the outside, inside, your brain is processing experiences, connecting past knowledge with present emotions, running gentle simulations of the future. It's asking, what if we tried this? Could it mean that? What happens if we let go? This background processing is especially helpful when problems are complex or emotionally tangled, the kinds of issues that don't have immediate solutions. When you force yourself to solve such problems directly, you often end up circling around the same thoughts, stuck in loops. But when you step away, when you let your mind wander, the loops break. Your thoughts begin to flow in new directions. Your brain starts to search the far corners of your memory and imagination, looking for answers you didn't even know you had. Daydreaming helps loosen the grip of habitual thinking. It takes you beyond the obvious, beyond the first and most familiar answers. You may start thinking about one thing, but then, without warning, your mind shifts. You're remembering a story someone told you years ago, or an image from a book, or a moment of intuition you dismissed. These fragments may seem unrelated at first, but the brain knows how to weave them together. It's doing this all the time, quietly, patiently, like a spider building a web in the dark. This is why so many breakthroughs happen not during effort, but after it. Artists, writers, mathematicians, and scientists have long known this truth. They may spend hours trying to crack a problem, only to find the answer when they stop trying, when they take a walk, lie down, or turn their attention to something simple and repetitive. This shift away from focused effort gives the mind permission to reorganize itself. It's as if clarity can only enter once striving has left the room. And the process is not limited to grand ideas or intellectual puzzles. It happens in the small, personal questions too. The quiet conflicts you haven't resolved. The difficult conversations you replay over and over. The choices you've avoided because they feel too heavy to hold. When you daydream, these problems often resurface, not to torment you, but to transform. The mind begins to soften them, to shape them into something more understandable, to explore different angles, different outcomes, without fear or judgment. There's something deeply kind about the way the brain solves problems during daydreaming. It doesn't push, it doesn't demand, it doesn't shout. It listens, it reflects, it whispers, and often, that whisper is all you need. You may suddenly feel less anxious about something that had consumed you. You may see a conflict from the other person's perspective. You may find that what once seemed impossible now feels strangely manageable. These aren't sudden miracles. They're the product of quiet internal work done over time beneath your awareness. Even more fascinating is how the brain prioritizes which problems to solve. It doesn't always pick the loudest or most urgent ones. It often picks the ones that matter most to you, the ones connected to your values, your identity, your deeper sense of purpose. This is why daydreams so often return to the same themes: love, meaning, change, freedom, belonging. These are not random distractions. They are signals. They are your mind's way of saying, "This matters. Let's sit with it a while." And in this sitting, in this non-linear, unforced exploration, something changes. You start to see patterns in your life. You recognize recurring fears or habits. You become aware of your longings, your hopes, your resistance. The problem may remain unsolved on the surface, but you're no longer lost in it. You've gained perspective. And sometimes, that's all it takes to begin. Daydreaming, then, is not about avoidance. It's about allowing. It's about creating space for your brain to do what it does best: make meaning. Not just answers, but understanding. Not just solutions, but insight. It's a gentle intelligence, one that doesn't always look smart or efficient on the outside, but that is quietly doing some of the deepest cognitive and emotional work you are capable of. So the next time you find yourself staring into space, don't rush to pull yourself back. Don't scold yourself for being unproductive. Know that your mind may be quietly working on something important, something it can't solve in a spreadsheet or a checklist, something only the soft, wandering light of a daydream can illuminate. Watch a child for even just a few minutes, and you'll see something extraordinary. Not in what they accomplish or how they explain their thoughts, but in the way their mind drifts. How easily, how naturally, and how often. One moment, they're staring at a ceiling tile. The next, they're lost in a quiet world of castles, astronauts, invisible friends, and endless what-ifs. To an adult, it might look like the child is zoning out or wasting time, but in reality, the child is doing something foundational. They are learning, exploring, growing through the quiet, unstructured power of daydreaming. For children, daydreaming is not a break from reality. It's a tool to understand it. It's how they test the rules, try out different roles, rehearse emotions, and make sense of experiences that their vocabulary and awareness haven't yet caught up with. In a world that often feels too big, too loud, and too fast, the daydream becomes a private sanctuary where they can stretch their minds safely, far beyond the limits of their physical world. Inside the child's daydream, a cardboard box becomes a spaceship. A patch of grass transforms into an entire jungle. A few sticks in the dirt become the bones of a dinosaur just discovered. These aren't just fun distractions. They are building blocks of imagination, language, empathy, and resilience. As the child invents new worlds, characters, and stories, they are exercising the parts of their brain responsible for memory, emotion, abstract thinking, and creativity. In this way, daydreaming becomes a kind of play that exists entirely inside the mind. What's fascinating is how much of this imaginative wandering happens without instruction. No one teaches a child to pretend. No one needs to. It's almost instinctual, as if the brain wants to play, needs to pretend in order to make sense of being alive. And it's through this playful wandering that children begin to form the foundation of who they are, what they like, what they fear, what excites them, and what kinds of stories they tell themselves about the world and their place in it. When a child engages in deep imaginative play, they are doing more than entertaining themselves. They are simulating experiences. They are practicing emotional regulation, learning how to feel brave, how to resolve conflict, how to be the hero or even the villain. Not because they want to cause harm, but because they want to understand the full range of human feeling. These internal rehearsals are powerful. They shape the child's capacity to empathize, to self-reflect, to anticipate consequences, and to dream about possibilities. Research in developmental psychology supports this beautifully. Children who are allowed to daydream freely tend to develop stronger problem-solving skills, more robust vocabularies, and more flexible social intelligence. They learn how to take perspectives, imagining what someone else might think or feel. They learn how to narrate their own experiences, turning the chaotic stream of real life into a manageable story. And perhaps most importantly, they learn how to be alone with themselves, to enjoy their own company, and to find richness in the spaces where nothing outwardly is happening. This capacity to generate inner stimulation, to create mental landscapes out of thin air, becomes especially important in moments of boredom or stress. When children are not immediately entertained or distracted, their minds turn inward, and that's where the real magic begins. They begin to explore themselves and their environment in a more creative, more meaningful way. The absence of structured activity doesn't create emptiness. It creates opportunity. But something begins to change as children grow older. The structured routines of school, the pressure to achieve, and the increasing presence of screens and scheduled tasks begin to crowd out the spaciousness of the inner world. Slowly, daydreaming begins to be seen not as a strength, but as a distraction, something to be corrected, a lapse in attention. A wandering mind becomes a problem to fix, when in fact, it was once the very engine of the child's emotional and cognitive development. In truth, children don't stop needing daydreams as they grow, but the world often stops giving them permission. The structured expectations of adulthood creep in too early. Focus becomes a virtue. Imagination becomes a luxury. Silence is mistaken for boredom. And yet, the brain doesn't change overnight. That same instinct to drift and dream remains, waiting patiently beneath the surface, hoping to be invited back. What's often misunderstood is that children aren't just preparing for the future through academic learning. They are preparing for life through imaginative play, through daydreaming. They're preparing to cope with disappointment, to invent solutions, to navigate relationships, and to trust their own minds. These are not trivial skills. They are deeply human skills. And when nurtured, they give rise to adults who are not only more creative and adaptable, but more self-aware, more empathetic, and more comfortable with uncertainty. It's in the quiet, in the nothingness of an unscheduled hour, that a child learns to listen to themselves. They learn what excites them, what confuses them, what stories they want to tell. And as they build these internal worlds, with dragons or space missions or invisible cities, they are also building a sense of inner agency, the realization that they can create meaning, not just consume it. The beauty of daydreaming in childhood is that it invites experimentation without consequence. A child can be bold, strange, funny, or dramatic in their imagination without fear of judgment. They can make mistakes, reimagine outcomes, and explore complex emotions in a space that feels entirely safe. It's rehearsal for the challenges of real life, a soft preparation for the complexities of growing up. And perhaps this is why some of the most insightful, original, and emotionally attuned adults are those who never fully gave up the habit of wandering off inside their own minds. They carried the child's gift with them, the ability to pause the world and enter a space where ideas are born not from pressure, but from curiosity. So when a child stares into space, or talks to an invisible friend, or creates elaborate storylines with simple toys, something profound is happening. The brain is blooming. The self is forming. The seeds of creative and emotional intelligence are being planted, not through instruction, but through freedom. Freedom to explore, to wander without purpose. And even though most of this work is invisible to the outside world, it leaves behind something lasting, a richer inner life, a stronger imaginative muscle, and a mind that knows how to create beauty from silence. There's a curious thing that happens when your mind begins to drift into the future. Without trying, without planning it, you begin to see yourself there. Not just in a vague sense, but in vivid scenes, specific moments, imagined conversations, feelings that haven't happened yet but already seem familiar. This type of daydreaming, where your thoughts skip ahead into what might be, is more than a mental detour. It's a form of preparation, a quiet, intuitive rehearsal for life itself. When you daydream about the future, your brain is doing something remarkably sophisticated. It is building simulations. These simulations may look like fantasies or wishful thinking, but they are based on real components. Your memories, your desires, your fears, your beliefs about what's possible. It's as if your brain takes the raw materials of your current life and reshapes them into imagined futures, some hopeful, some scary, some strangely specific. These mental constructions help you test different paths without physically walking them. They let you explore outcomes, prepare for risks, and taste what certain decisions might feel like before you commit to them. This is not just about imagining success or dreaming big. Often, the most powerful, future-focused daydreams are the smallest ones. A conversation you need to have, a project you want to begin, a quiet moment you hope to experience one day. Your mind may wander into a scene where you're sitting at a dinner table with someone you've missed, or standing in front of a room, speaking your truth, or walking down a street in a city you've never been to, feeling freer than you ever have before. These are not idle thoughts. They are quiet manifestations of the life you are longing to live. What's so striking is how real these imagined futures can feel. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between what you vividly imagine and what you actually experience. The same neural pathways can activate. The same emotional responses can arise. That's why a future daydream can bring you to tears or give you butterflies in your stomach. It's not just fiction. It's an emotional and neurological event. You are feeling the future as if it were already happening, and in doing so, you begin to shape your relationship to it. This matters because how you imagine the future directly influences how you behave in the present. If you repeatedly daydream about achieving something, your brain begins to normalize it. It no longer feels foreign. You become more comfortable with the idea of it, more open to the possibility, more prepared to act. And the opposite is also true. If your future-oriented daydreams are filled with fear or failure, those too can become self-fulfilling patterns, quietly influencing your choices through avoidance or hesitation. But the beauty of daydreaming is that it gives you a chance to choose your future thoughts, to try on different outcomes, to notice which ones feel expansive and which ones feel limiting. In this way, daydreaming becomes a kind of compass, pointing not toward what will happen, but toward what you care about, toward what you need to heal, toward the direction your inner world is naturally leaning. Some daydreams about the future are wishful. You may imagine the perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect home. These dreams are less about precision and more about emotion. They tell you what you yearn for, even if you haven't spoken it out loud. Other daydreams are more practical, envisioning how to navigate a challenge or what you'll say in a difficult moment. These are mental rehearsals. They allow you to practice courage, clarity, patience, whatever the situation might require of you. Interestingly, daydreaming about the future also increases your brain's ability to plan. As you drift into imagined scenes, your mind starts filling in the gaps. What would it take to get there? What might stand in the way? How would it feel if I failed? How would I try again? These unspoken questions get worked out beneath your conscious awareness, creating a kind of emotional blueprint for moving forward. You begin to construct a sense of narrative, a personal storyline that carries you from here to there. Even if the story changes later, the act of imagining it gives you something to move toward. Future-focused daydreams also have a powerful impact on motivation. When you can see a version of yourself that feels meaningful, the effort to get there no longer feels hollow. It becomes emotionally charged. You begin to act not from obligation, but from alignment, as if your current self is trying to meet your future self somewhere in the middle. The clearer and more emotionally resonant the daydream, the stronger the pull to move in its direction. But daydreaming about the future isn't always about achievement or transformation. Sometimes it's about comfort, about imagining a life with fewer burdens, about creating a moment of peace in your mind when the present feels too heavy. In these cases, the future scene you drift into becomes a form of emotional regulation. It soothes you. It gives you hope. It tells you, quietly, that what you're feeling now is not permanent, that something softer might be waiting on the other side of this moment. For people who have experienced trauma, difficulty, or prolonged uncertainty, daydreaming about the future can be both healing and painful. It can stir feelings of longing, loss, or fear of disappointment. But even then, the act of imagining is an act of resilience. To picture yourself in a better place, even for a few seconds, is a form of inner strength. It means that part of you still believes change is possible. That part of you is still reaching forward. It's important to notice what kinds of futures your mind returns to, what scenarios play on repeat, who's there with you, what kind of environment you imagine yourself in. These details are not random, they're clues. They reflect what matters to you, what you miss, what you're still searching for. And if you listen closely, they can guide you more honestly than any checklist or goal-setting routine ever could. Daydreaming, especially about the future, reminds you that your story is not finished, that there are still pages to be written, characters to be introduced, places to go. It helps you carry a sense of direction inside you, not rigid, not forced, but living, breathing, evolving. A future not built only from plans and logic, but from feeling and intuition. A future that whispers to you through silence, through stillness, through dreams not yet lived, but already known. There are moments in life when the outside world feels too heavy, too fast, too loud. When reality presses in from all sides, with its demands, its deadlines, its noise, and its weight. And yet, even in the midst of all that pressure, there remains a quiet, hidden place within you, a space untouched by the world's demands, where healing can begin. That place is accessed not through effort or control, but through softness, through wandering, through the gentle, often underestimated power of daydreaming. When your mind drifts into memory or imagination, it isn't just entertaining itself. It's reaching for balance. It's trying to restore something that has been lost or overlooked. And in that drifting, in those gentle scenes that arise unbidden, a familiar face, a childhood place, a moment of peace that never quite happened, your brain is performing one of its oldest and most important tasks: emotional repair. Daydreaming allows you to revisit old wounds, not as a way to reopen them, but to give them attention in a way the conscious mind may resist. In the quiet of a daydream, there is no pressure to explain, no audience to satisfy. The mind simply goes where it needs to go. Sometimes it takes you to a moment that hurt, a conversation that ended too soon, an apology that never came, a choice that still echoes. You don't relive these moments in the same way as before. Instead, you reshape them. You explore how they could have ended differently. You imagine saying what you wish you'd said. You envision comfort where there was once only silence. This isn't avoidance. It's a form of internal integration. The mind is trying to give shape and context to emotional experiences that have remained unresolved. The process is subtle. You might not even realize it's happening, but afterward, you may notice that the memory no longer stings in quite the same way, that it feels less jagged, more like something you've carried and understood, rather than something that keeps ambushing you from the shadows. Daydreaming also creates a space for self-compassion. Often, in our daily lives, we are our own harshest critics. We replay mistakes, magnify flaws, question our worth. But in the gentler space of imagination, something shifts. You might imagine yourself from the outside, not as the one being judged, but as someone in need of kindness. You might see your younger self and feel a rush of understanding. You might imagine comforting yourself, forgiving yourself, offering grace where there has only been guilt. These imagined acts of healing may seem small, but they carry weight. The brain doesn't always differentiate between real and vividly imagined experiences, especially when emotion is involved. So when you picture yourself being understood, supported, or forgiven, even if only in your mind, your nervous system can begin to respond. Your breath deepens, your heart rate slows. The body begins to believe, maybe it's safe to let go. In this way, daydreaming becomes a private ritual of healing. It gives the heart room to stretch, to breathe, to revisit the parts of yourself that have been waiting patiently to be heard. It allows you to take your pain out of storage and hold it gently, without judgment. And sometimes, without even trying, your mind offers you a scene you didn't know you needed. A version of the past rewritten with care, or a future where the pain has softened and the light has returned. But daydreaming doesn't just help heal the past. It also helps you cope with the present. In moments of grief, heartbreak, or exhaustion, the mind often drifts to comforting images, places of quiet, people who brought peace, moments when life felt simpler or safer. These imagined scenes act as emotional anchors. They don't change the reality of the present, but they make it easier to bear. They remind you that peace still exists somewhere, and that it may return. This is especially powerful for people dealing with chronic emotional pain, trauma, or loss. Daydreams can serve as a kind of sanctuary, a space the world cannot touch. In that sanctuary, the rules are yours. You can cry without interruption. You can imagine yourself whole again. You can be vulnerable without fear. You can be loved without condition. These aren't illusions. They're internal gestures of resilience. They're your mind's way of keeping you afloat when everything else feels overwhelming. Even in the smallest daydreams, healing begins. You might picture yourself walking through a quiet forest, sunlight filtering through the trees, or floating in water, weightless and unbothered, or holding someone's hand and saying nothing at all. These simple visions can produce real emotional effects. Your body relaxes, your stress eases, your mind begins to believe, maybe I'm not as broken as I thought. There's a beauty to this kind of healing. Slow, invisible, quiet. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't need permission. It works beneath the surface, asking only for space and softness. And it often works best when you're not trying to make anything happen. When you surrender to the drift, when you allow your thoughts to move without resistance, your mind starts to guide you toward what you need. Not what the world says you need, but what your heart has quietly been aching for. Over time, as this process repeats, you begin to feel more whole. Not because the pain has vanished, but because it has been seen, held, honored. The daydream becomes a dialogue between the self that hurts and the self that heals. And in that dialogue, a new strength begins to emerge. One that isn't built on avoidance or denial, but on compassion and quiet truth. So when you find yourself slipping into a daydream, drifting into a scene that brings comfort or clarity, let it happen. Let the moment unfold. Don't rush back. Don't label it unproductive. Trust that your mind knows what it's doing. Trust that the heart, when given silence and space, knows how to mend itself in ways the conscious mind may never fully understand. One of the most extraordinary things about the human mind is its ability to simulate other people, to recreate voices, gestures, reactions, even full conversations with someone who isn't in the room. And when you're daydreaming, This remarkable talent often comes to life. Without needing to try, you find yourself imagining what someone might say, how they might respond, what you might have said differently, or how a difficult situation might play out. These imagined interactions are not just idle musings. They are social rehearsals, deeply complex, emotionally rich simulations that help you navigate the world of relationships, even in solitude. Your brain is wired for social connection. From the earliest moments of life, it seeks to understand and predict the behavior of others. It studies faces, picks up on tone, interprets gestures, and stores all of this information in a vast internal archive. When you daydream about a conversation, whether it's with someone you know intimately or someone you've only just met, your brain draws from this archive. It plays out scenarios using memory, imagination, and empathy, allowing you to explore dynamics in a space that's completely safe. These imagined interactions are powerful because they give you the opportunity to practice being yourself in relation to others, without fear of judgment, interruption, or rejection. You can speak honestly, ask questions, express anger, offer forgiveness, or admit vulnerability. You can try on different versions of yourself, braver, quieter, more patient, more assertive, and see how those versions feel. Through this gentle rehearsal, you begin to refine your understanding of not only how you relate to others, but also how you wish to be seen. Sometimes, daydreaming about others helps resolve unfinished business. You might revisit a conversation that didn't go the way you wanted. You might say the words you couldn't say at the time. You might imagine being understood, validated, heard. These imagined closures are not false. They can bring real emotional relief. The body often responds as though the interaction truly happened, releasing tension, calming the heart, or bringing a sense of peace that had been missing. Your brain is helping you process and integrate the experience by giving you a second chance, even if it only lives in your imagination. There's also a kind of wisdom in how the brain chooses which interactions to revisit. It often brings up relationships that matter the most, even if they're painful, distant, or unresolved. In your daydreams, you may find yourself talking to someone you haven't seen in years, someone who shaped you, hurt you, inspired you, someone whose absence still lingers. And in those imagined conversations, you get to explore the feelings that never had room to be expressed. You might cry in the safety of your own mind. You might forgive someone or ask to be forgiven. You might find clarity in what once felt like confusion. These social simulations also extend into the future. You might imagine meeting someone new, or having a difficult talk you've been putting off, or reconnecting with someone after time apart. These future rehearsals are a form of emotional scaffolding. They help prepare you, not by scripting exact words, but by letting you feel your way into the situation. You get a chance to explore your own readiness, your fears, your hopes. And often, when the real moment comes, you feel more grounded because you've already visited that emotional space. Another fascinating layer is how the brain weaves together multiple perspectives during these imagined exchanges. When you daydream a conversation, you're not just speaking your own lines. You're also imagining what the other person might say, feel, or think. This act of perspective taking is a core component of empathy. It helps you understand people more deeply, their motivations, their pain, their reasons. Even if your interpretation isn't perfect, the effort to understand expands your emotional intelligence. It allows you to move through the world with greater compassion, nuance, and patience. And yet, the benefits of social simulation through daydreaming go beyond emotional insight. They also serve a practical purpose. They help you prepare for the complexities of real-life interaction. Whether you're giving a presentation, asking someone out, setting a boundary, or simply trying to say something meaningful, your brain uses daydreaming to prepare the terrain. It helps reduce anxiety, boost confidence, and clarify your own intentions. In many ways, it's like stretching before a long walk, a gentle preparation that makes the journey smoother. Children do this instinctively. They hold entire conversations with imaginary friends, or reenact real-life conflicts with dolls, toys, or even with themselves. These rehearsals help them understand relationships, practice communication, and process experiences that are too big for their young minds to express directly. As adults, we may stop playing with toys, but the inner rehearsal continues, quietly, internally, as our minds navigate the intricate web of human connection. What's beautiful about these internal conversations is that they often bring insight without resolution. You don't always need to act on the daydream. Sometimes just imagining the interaction is enough. It can reveal what you truly feel, what you truly want, what you're still carrying. And in that awareness, something shifts. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to understand it more clearly. Sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not a loud breakthrough, but a soft recognition whispered during an imagined exchange. There's also a kind of tenderness that arises when you allow your mind to interact with people who are no longer here, loved ones who have passed away, or who have drifted out of your life. In daydreams, you can sit with them again. You can tell them what you've become, how you've changed, how you miss them. These conversations may not alter the facts of reality, but they can soothe the ache of absence. They give you a place to feel connected again, even if just for a moment. In this way, daydreaming becomes not only a rehearsal, but a form of emotional companionship. When you're alone, your mind doesn't leave you isolated. It brings back voices, faces, laughter, arguments, fragments of human connection that continue to shape you. And as your inner world grows richer with these imagined dialogues, you begin to carry a deeper sense of presence into your real relationships. You listen more. You speak with greater awareness. You recognize the unspoken dynamics that live beneath words. The daydream, then, is not an escape from others. It's a way of staying close to those you love, those you've lost, those you've yet to meet. It's a way of exploring the landscape of human connection in a space where vulnerability is allowed, where mistakes can be made without consequence, where you can learn how to love and be loved in return. And when you emerge from that space, something often lingers: a softened heart, a clearer mind, a quiet readiness for whatever conversation life brings next. Life, for all its beauty, can sometimes feel like a weight pressing down, a relentless cascade of responsibilities, uncertainties, expectations, and noise. We're taught to be alert, to respond quickly, to always be doing something useful or productive. But the mind, in its quiet wisdom, knows better. It knows that in order to survive, truly survive, we sometimes need to leave. Not physically, but mentally. We need a way to step out of the noise without leaving our own skin. And daydreaming offers exactly that. It becomes not just a pleasant distraction, but a powerful and necessary form of escape. Not all escapes are equal. Some take us away from ourselves. They numb, they erase, they dull. But daydreaming offers a different kind of escape, one that takes us toward ourselves. It leads us inward, not outward. It allows us to pull back from the sharpness of the world, to retreat into the soft, borderless space of imagination, memory, and quiet desire. Here, in this internal retreat, you are free. Free from the roles you play, the expectations you carry, the image you feel obligated to maintain. In this private sanctuary, you can imagine yourself in 1,000 different lives. You can be somewhere untouched by time, lying in a sunlit meadow, floating in the calm of deep water, walking through the ruins of an ancient city where your name is not known. These scenes might never exist in the real world, and yet they exist in you. Your body may be sitting still, but your consciousness is on a journey. And in that journey, something essential begins to happen. You recover. There is a deep emotional intelligence in the way the brain selects these daydreams. When the present moment becomes too overwhelming, too rigid, too unsafe, your mind gently guides you to places that can hold you. Not because it's trying to avoid reality, but because it's trying to make reality bearable. These imagined escapes can feel sacred. They are woven from your deepest longings, your most tender memories, your forgotten joys. You return to the scent of a childhood kitchen, the sound of waves at a beach you visited once, the feeling of being seen and loved by someone long gone. These are not delusions. They are emotional oxygen. What makes daydreaming so effective as an escape is that it requires nothing from the world. You don't need a plane ticket or a new job or anyone else's permission. The sanctuary is always available. It travels with you into the grocery store, the waiting room, the long bus ride, the sleepless night. It lives quietly beneath your surface thoughts, waiting for the moment when you finally let go and drift. And not every escape through daydreaming is rooted in nostalgia or peace. Sometimes it's rooted in boldness, in the desire to imagine something better, something wildly different from the life you're living. You might daydream about starting over in a distant city, speaking your truth without hesitation, falling in love with someone who finally understands you. These fantasies can feel like rebellion, a silent protest against the parts of life that feel suffocating. And though they may not always become real, they offer something powerful: hope. Hope lives in the act of imagining. The very fact that your mind is still capable of dreaming of something else, something kinder, freer, more alive, is a form of resistance. It means that no matter how heavy life gets, a part of you still believes there could be something more, even if you don't have the strength to pursue it right now. Even if you're still figuring out what it is. That soft flicker of desire, born in the safety of a daydream, keeps something alive in you that the world cannot touch. This is why people often turn to daydreaming in times of hardship, when the real world offers no good options, when the path forward is unclear, when the heart is tired, the mind reaches inward for refuge. And it finds it in stories, in scenes, in imagined conversations, and impossible moments that nourish something vital. The world outside may remain the same, but your experience of it begins to shift. You return from your mental journey with just a little more breath in your lungs, a little more softness in your heart, a little more room to keep going. Daydreaming also allows you to explore your emotions safely. When feelings are too intense to process directly, grief, rage, longing, fear, they often sneak into your daydreams in symbolic form. Maybe you're running through an endless forest. Maybe you're building something with your hands. Maybe you're surrounded by people who are listening to you without interruption. These metaphors are not meaningless. They are your mind's way of processing pain without overwhelming you. They're like emotional translators, helping you make sense of what you feel before you're ready to name it out loud. In this way, daydreaming is both an escape and a return. You escape the surface tension of the world, the noise, the roles, the pressure, and in doing so, you return to yourself. You remember what you love, what you fear, what you've forgotten, what you want. The parts of you that feel buried under obligation begin to speak again. The inner voice that whispers truth and longing, often ignored in the noise of daily life, finally has space to rise. Even just a few minutes of this kind of mental wandering can change the texture of your day. It can soften the edges of a hard morning. It can offer clarity in the middle of uncertainty. It can be a light in the middle of emotional fog. And you don't have to achieve anything in your daydream. You don't have to figure it all out. You just have to drift, to allow, to let your mind show you what it needs to show. So many of us are exhausted, not just because we're busy, but because we never allow ourselves this kind of mental rest. We never give ourselves permission to go inward, to slip into that timeless space where imagination can breathe. But your brain, your brilliant, quietly aching brain, is always inviting you. Not because you're broken, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And all humans need a place to rest that isn't dependent on the world behaving. That place is inside you. It always has been. And the daydream is the doorway. A gentle, patient doorway that opens not with effort, but with stillness, with curiosity, with the simple act of letting your thoughts float beyond the present moment, just long enough to remember that you are more than your obligations. You are more than your circumstances. You are and have always been the keeper of a world within, one that waits for you, one that heals you, one that reminds you that even in the hardest moments, you are never truly without refuge. There's a subtle art to daydreaming, not just in letting your mind wander, but in learning to guide it gently. Most of the time, daydreams seem to arise spontaneously, arriving like waves that wash over you without warning. They may start with a memory, an image, a feeling, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely. But what if, instead of just drifting wherever the current takes you, you could steer the dream? What if you could shape your inner world with intention, curiosity, and quiet control? This is the realm of lucid daydreaming, a space where awareness and imagination meet. Unlike the vivid, cinematic quality of lucid dreaming during sleep, lucid daydreaming occurs while you're fully awake. It's not about escaping reality, but about weaving your awareness into the fabric of your mental wanderings. It begins with a simple shift, noticing when your mind begins to drift, and instead of pulling it back to the task at hand, choosing to follow it more deliberately, to explore it, to interact with it like you would with a half-remembered story you want to finish writing. In a lucid daydream, you become both the observer and the creator. You notice the scenery of your imagination, the characters that appear, the emotions that rise, and you realize that you have the ability to nudge the narrative, to ask questions, to change the pace, to bring in something new. You might start in a familiar place, like your childhood bedroom, and then slowly reshape it. Open the window to an ocean that wasn't there, Invite in someone you haven't seen in years, or walk out the door into a forest lit by soft golden stars. This isn't just an exercise in fantasy, it's a form of conscious self-exploration. When you enter a lucid daydream, you're stepping into a dialogue with your subconscious. The symbols and scenes that arise may seem random, but they're often rich with meaning. That house you keep returning to in your imagination, what does it represent? That voice you hear speaking to you in the quiet, whose voice is it, and what does it want you to hear? The freedom to manipulate the dream world doesn't make it less true. It makes it more available to you, more responsive, more intimate. And the effects of this practice can be profound. People who regularly engage in intentional, vivid daydreaming often report feeling more in touch with their inner world. They begin to notice patterns, recurring fears, recurring desires, themes that repeat across different imagined scenarios. It's like holding up a mirror, not to your face, but to your mind. You begin to recognize which voices inside you are echoes from the past, which ones belong to people who shaped you, and which ones are entirely your own, perhaps quieter, but more authentic. Lucid daydreaming can also be deeply healing. In your imagination, you can return to painful moments with more compassion. You can picture yourself walking through an old memory, not with shame or regret, but with gentleness. You can rewrite the moment, not to erase the truth, but to offer yourself the response you needed and never received. Sometimes that response is a word, sometimes it's a gesture, sometimes it's just presence. The ability to sit with an old version of yourself and say, "I see you now, I'm here." This inner reimagining doesn't change the past, but it does change how the past lives inside you. It softens the edges. It brings light into corners that have stayed in shadow for too long. And because it's imagined, because it's not bound by the limitations of reality, it can be as specific and beautiful as you need it to be. You can imagine holding your own hand through a moment of fear. You can imagine being witnessed, being heard, being safe. And the mind, brilliant and adaptive as it is, responds to these imagined experiences as if they were real. The body relaxes, the nervous system eases, emotional weight begins to lift. There's also a creative power in lucid daydreaming that is unlike anything else. Artists, writers, composers, and inventors have long spoken about ideas arriving in dreamlike states. Scenes that played out fully formed in their mind before they ever put pen to paper. When you train yourself to move through your daydreams with awareness, you're creating fertile ground for inspiration to bloom. You become a participant in the creative process rather than just a passive observer. You can walk into a blank imagined room and ask, "What's in here?" and watch as something unfolds. The more you practice this, the more vivid your inner world becomes. Your senses sharpen. You may start to feel the texture of imaginary walls, hear the distant hum of a dreamlike city, smell rain that hasn't fallen. This sensory richness isn't limited to sleep. It lives in your waking mind, waiting to be awakened through attention and care. And as your inner world becomes more vibrant, the outer world can begin to feel more alive too. You start to carry that sense of wonder with you. You begin to see that the imagination isn't something separate from reality. It's a lens through which reality is colored, deepened, and made more meaningful. Lucid daydreaming can also help clarify your path in life. When you allow yourself to imagine possible futures with intention, you start to get clearer about what actually resonates with you. You can try out different versions of your life, not just on a spreadsheet or in a journal, but in the living theater of your mind. What does it feel like to live in that city, to leave that job, to follow that dream? What do you notice in your body as you imagine each version? Does it feel like expansion or contraction, like light or weight? These emotional signals become guides. They help you align your outer choices with your inner truth. And perhaps most beautifully, lucid daydreaming brings you back into a relationship with yourself that is playful, curious, and kind. In the adult world, there's often little room for unstructured imagination. We're told to focus, to be practical, to stay grounded. But grounding doesn't mean cutting off the sky. It means standing tall enough to reach into both earth and air, to be rooted and free at once. Your mind was never meant to live only in the present moment. It was made to stretch, to explore, to dream with its eyes open. In lucid daydreaming, you reclaim the fullness of that ability. You give yourself permission to wander with intention, to build castles in the sky and walk their halls, to speak to the parts of yourself that are waiting in quiet corners, to create stories that heal, images that inspire, and visions that guide you forward, not by accident, but by choice. And in that choice, a new kind of freedom begins to grow, not just the freedom to imagine, but the freedom to become what your imagination knows you already are. There's a strange paradox when it comes to intelligence and focus. We tend to assume that intelligent people are always deeply concentrated, always engaged in some high-level problem solving, locked in tight control of their attention at all times. But the truth is often the opposite. Some of the most intelligent minds are also the ones that drift the most. Their thoughts seem to wander off course. Their eyes go distant in the middle of a conversation. They get lost in possibilities, hypothetical questions, ideas that don't seem immediately useful. And while this might be mistaken for distraction, it's something far more fascinating. It's the hallmark of a mind that moves in spirals instead of straight lines. A mind that knows how to let go of the surface to dive deeper. Research has started to confirm what many intuitive people have long suspected. The more cognitively advanced a brain is, the more likely it is to wander. Not because it's lazy, but because it's processing information in complex, layered ways. Intelligent minds are constantly juggling more data, not just external facts, but internal questions, remembered experiences, conflicting values, emotional nuances. This inner density often leads to spontaneous mental drifting. The mind, in its brilliance, simply needs room to breathe. A highly intelligent person might be sitting in a meeting, listening politely, while simultaneously constructing a mental model of an entirely different concept, imagining the long-term consequences of a decision no one else is even thinking about, or playing out an internal ethical debate inspired by a single offhand comment. Their attention hasn't disappeared. It's just slipped through a more intricate doorway. It's exploring connections, hidden implications, broader frameworks, and in doing so, it appears absent. But it's not absent. It's elsewhere, in a realm most people never even think to visit. This kind of cognitive wandering is sometimes called task-unrelated thought, but in intelligent individuals, it's rarely unrelated to everything. It's simply untethered from the immediate demand. And that untethering allows for remarkable insight. When you allow your mind to drift, you give it permission to bypass the usual grooves and find new pathways. That's why so many great discoveries, artistic breakthroughs, and philosophical insights don't happen during moments of intense focus. They arrive when the mind is relaxed, walking, resting, daydreaming. For people with high intellectual capacity, rigid focus can sometimes feel like confinement. Their minds crave complexity, nuance, pattern recognition, and novelty. Daydreaming becomes a way of keeping the intellect engaged, even when the environment doesn't offer enough stimulation. It allows the mind to generate its own challenge, its own landscape of inquiry. The daydream becomes a kind of mental playground where the intelligent person can test out ideas, imagine better systems, create mental simulations, or engage with the deeper mysteries of existence. It's also common for intelligent minds to gravitate toward meta-thinking, thinking about thinking. This is often what fuels their daydreams. They don't just wonder about what is, but about how they're perceiving it, what frameworks they're using, what beliefs are shaping their understanding. This kind of recursive thought loops back on itself, not in circles of confusion, but in spirals of deepening awareness. And while it can lead to complexity, even anxiety at times, it also leads to insight that is layered and profound. In social settings, these minds may appear distracted, but they are often running multiple levels of thought at once. They may be analyzing the tone of someone's voice, remembering a related moment from 10 years ago, forming an internal hypothesis about why something is being said, imagining how the conversation might evolve, and simultaneously constructing an alternative way the entire interaction could unfold. These overlapping thought streams are not a flaw. They're a feature of a deeply textured mind. But with this depth comes a challenge. The world is not always designed for wandering minds. Classrooms, offices, institutions, they often reward linear thinking, task completion, and external performance. The inward, meandering, non-linear processing that intelligent daydreamers rely on may go unnoticed or even be misunderstood. A child who stares out the window during math class might be labeled as inattentive, when in fact they're reconstructing the entire number system in their mind. An adult who seems disengaged in a meeting might be solving a far more complex problem than the one being discussed. The mind drifts not because it lacks discipline, but because it sees something else worth exploring. Daydreaming also offers a form of mental rejuvenation for these high-functioning minds. Just as muscles need rest after intense exertion, the brain needs unstructured space to recover from deep cognitive work. For intelligent individuals, daydreaming is not a lapse. It's a recalibration. It's a way to digest abstract concepts, test hypothetical outcomes, or integrate emotional information that couldn't be fully processed during focus. It's the breath between thoughts, the rest between insights. And there's an emotional depth to this process as well. Intelligent minds often carry complex emotional landscapes. They question not only what is true, but what is meaningful, ethical, or beautiful. Their daydreams may take them into existential territory, pondering mortality, purpose, or the nature of consciousness itself. These aren't idle musings. They're part of a lifelong internal dialogue. They help the individual navigate the world, not just with intellect, but with a kind of internal compass, one forged in imagination and reflection. It's worth noting that many of history's most influential thinkers were chronic daydreamers. Nikola Tesla visualized entire machines in his mind before ever building them. Leonardo da Vinci filled pages with sketches and scattered thoughts, many of which emerged from mental wanderings. Emily Dickinson living a quiet life of reflection, used her poetic imagination to explore the vastness of the human spirit. These weren't people disconnected from reality. They were deeply engaged with it, but in ways that required time away from its surface. So if your mind wanders often, if you find yourself drifting into deep thoughts that seem disconnected from your current environment, don't be so quick to call it a problem. It might be one of your greatest strengths, the ability to think without prompt, to imagine without direction, to follow a thought wherever it leads. This is the soil where original ideas are planted. It's the quiet work of a brain that refuses to be limited by the immediate. It sees more. It feels more. It asks more. In a world that often values productivity over presence and output over depth, intelligent daydreamers remind us of something essential, that some of the most important work the mind does happens when nothing is visible on the outside, when the eyes go distant, when the fingers pause above the keyboard, when the task is set aside and the thought, soft and unassuming, begins to unfold. That's where the treasure often lies, in the uncharted territories of the wandering, brilliant mind. We live in a culture that worships focus. From the time we're young, we're taught that success comes from keeping our attention fixed, our minds sharp, our eyes on the prize. Productivity is measured by output. Stillness is mistaken for laziness. Idleness is feared, avoided, filled with endless stimulation and to-do lists. We're told that every minute must be accounted for, that every drifting thought is a threat to progress. But what if this isn't just a misunderstanding? What if it's a complete reversal of the truth? What if the very moments we consider wasted are actually some of the most important? What if doing nothing, simply allowing the mind to wander without purpose or direction, is not a failure of discipline, but an essential part of being fully human? This is the myth that daydreaming dismantles. The idea that time spent in thought, imagination, or quiet reflection is somehow inferior to time spent in action. In fact, the opposite is often true. When you step away from the constant pressure to perform, when you let go of the need to prove, produce, and control, your mind begins to do something remarkable. It begins to synthesize. The brain is not a machine that performs best under constant strain. It's an organic, living system. And like all systems in nature, it thrives in cycles, in periods of activity followed by periods of rest. Just as muscles grow during recovery and soil becomes fertile again after being left fallow, the mind requires space. It needs the stillness between tasks, the silence between sounds. And in those moments when you're not actively focused, when your thoughts are drifting like leaves on water, that's when some of the most profound work takes place. During these quiet periods, your brain is consolidating memories, forming connections, identifying patterns. Thoughts that seemed unrelated begin to reveal hidden links. Emotional experiences that felt overwhelming begin to settle into something coherent, something manageable. Ideas begin to gather shape, not through force, but through the natural motion of the unconscious mind. It's like watching a puzzle piece float into place, seemingly on its own, with no effort at all. That's why so many breakthroughs happen, not when you're working, but when you're resting, when you're washing dishes, walking, showering, or staring at the ceiling. These aren't wasted moments. They're incubators. They're the fertile ground in which insight grows. But in a world addicted to movement, this kind of mental stillness often feels uncomfortable. It's easy to panic when you're not doing something useful. You might feel guilty for not being busy, not being on task, not producing. You might reach for your phone to fill the silence, to scroll away the drift. And yet in doing so, you interrupt a process that could have gifted you with something meaningful, an idea, a realization, a deeper understanding of yourself. There's also a deeper cultural bias at play, the myth of the linear path. We're told that progress must be a straight line, that you must move from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. But real growth, real transformation, is rarely linear. It happens in spirals, in loops, in pauses. It happens when you double back, when you revisit old thoughts, when you wonder. Daydreaming honors this non-linear path. It respects the wisdom of the detour. When your mind is allowed to meander, it often stumbles upon the truth sideways. It approaches clarity not by charging at it, but by circling around it. You might find yourself returning to a memory you hadn't thought about in years, or suddenly imagining a future version of yourself that feels surprisingly real. These mental visits aren't random. They're part of the mind's quiet process of integration, of making sense of who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. What's even more powerful is that these unproductive moments can shift your entire perspective. They can offer emotional resolution. They can remind you of what actually matters. They can reconnect you to the parts of yourself that get neglected in the busyness of the day. Your creativity, your inner child, your quiet longings. These aren't distractions, they're revelations. And they arrive only when you create space for them to emerge. In this way, daydreaming becomes an act of resistance. It pushes back against a system that equates your worth with your output. It whispers, you don't have to earn rest. You don't have to justify your silence. You're allowed to simply be. And in that being, in that simple act of letting go, something incredible happens. You begin to remember who you are beyond your to-do list. You begin to tap into a deeper intelligence, one that isn't driven by urgency, but by curiosity. One that isn't afraid of pauses, but welcomes them. And this intelligence, this quiet wisdom that comes through daydreaming, is often what brings you back into alignment. It's what reminds you that your life is not a project to complete, but an experience to explore. That not every moment has to be maximized. That value isn't always visible. That some of the richest, most important work happens in the invisible spaces, the in-between times when you're simply staring out a window, letting your thoughts drift like clouds across an open sky. Even creativity, often mistaken for a purely active process, is deeply rooted in rest. The most original ideas don't arrive when the mind is overworked. They arrive in moments of openness. They emerge when the gates are unguarded, when the usual logic has softened. This is why so many artists, writers, and thinkers speak of ideas arriving out of nowhere. In truth, the ideas didn't come from nowhere. They came from the rich, hidden processes of the wandering mind. The mind that was allowed to roam freely, without pressure. So the next time you catch yourself daydreaming, resist the urge to pull back. Instead, lean in. Let yourself drift. Let the moment expand. Let the silence grow longer than feels comfortable. You don't have to turn it into something. You don't have to find a use for it. The usefulness is already there, in the very act of surrendering to stillness. Because what looks like nothing from the outside is often everything on the inside. What appears to be a lapse in attention may in fact be the beginning of a deeper awareness, And what the world might call wasted time could be the very thing that brings you back to yourself, clearer, calmer, and more alive than before. There's something ancient, almost primal, about the way the natural world interacts with the human mind. Before screens, before cities, before language itself, there was the sound of wind in trees, the shimmer of sunlight on water, the steady rhythm of waves against a shore. And it was in these places, in forests and fields, by rivers and mountains, that the mind first learned to wander. There is something in nature that invites stillness without silence, movement without urgency. It doesn't ask questions or offer answers, but it creates the perfect space for the mind to begin asking its own. When you find yourself surrounded by nature, truly immersed in it, without distraction, something subtle begins to happen. Your breath slows, your gaze softens, your awareness begins to expand outward, but at the same time, it deepens inward. You might not even realize it, but your thoughts start to loosen, untangling themselves from the knots of everyday worry. And in their place, new patterns begin to form, quiet, fluid, and curious. This is where daydreaming thrives, not in the artificial buzz of fluorescent lights and rigid routines, but in the soft, open spaces that nature offers. A patch of sunlight flickering through leaves can spark a memory. The sight of a bird in flight can inspire an imagined story. The steady drip of water over stone can become a rhythm that carries your thoughts forward into places you hadn't planned to go. These aren't distractions, they're invitations, openings into the deeper levels of your mind, where clarity lives. What's remarkable is how effortlessly this happens in natural settings. You don't have to try to daydream when you're walking through a forest or sitting beside a lake. It just begins. The brain responds almost immediately to the slower pace, the subtle changes in texture, sound, and light. These environmental cues, so different from the controlled, repetitive environments we usually inhabit, signal to the brain that it can shift into a different mode. One that's not based on doing, but on being. One that's less about control and more about openness. This is sometimes referred to as soft fascination. Unlike the sharp, demanding attention required for reading a screen or driving through traffic, soft fascination allows your mind to be gently engaged without being overwhelmed. A flowing stream, the dance of leaves in the wind, the distant roll of thunder. All of these draw your attention just enough to hold it, but not so tightly that you can't drift. And it's in this drifting that the real work of daydreaming begins. Because when you daydream in nature, your thoughts often take on a different quality. They're less frantic, less self-critical, more fluid and expansive. You begin to see your life not as a series of tasks and failures and future plans, but as a story unfolding across seasons, full of patterns, cycles, moments of growth and stillness. Nature has a way of reminding you that not everything needs to be fixed immediately, that not all answers come through effort. Sometimes they come through silence, through space, through letting your mind be as wild and unpredictable as the landscape around you. There is a certain kind of honesty that arises when your mind is allowed to wander freely in nature. Without mirrors, screens, or anyone else watching, you become less performative and more reflective. You might find yourself thinking about someone you haven't spoken to in years, or revisiting a dream you quietly let go of. You might suddenly feel emotions rise that you didn't know you were carrying. And rather than analyzing them or trying to explain them away, you simply feel them. The natural world doesn't ask you to label your thoughts. It just offers you the space to have them. Even brief moments in nature can have this effect. Standing beneath a tree and watching its branches move in the wind. Sitting on a rock and feeling the sun warm your back. Listening to the chirping of insects as dusk settles in. These are not just aesthetically pleasing experiences. They are neurological reset buttons. They recalibrate your attention, soothe your nervous system, and open the gates of the imagination. The very same parts of the brain that activate during daydreaming are awakened by these gentle interactions with nature. It's no coincidence that some of the most profound spiritual and philosophical insights in history emerged not from laboratories or lecture halls, but from people who spent time walking alone, sitting beside rivers, gazing at stars. Thoreau in the woods, Rumi in the desert, the Buddha beneath a tree. All found their minds unfolding in nature's presence. Not because nature gave them the answers directly, but because it gave them the space to hear what was already waiting within them. In our modern world, we often treat nature as a backdrop, something pretty to look at while we get on with our real lives. But to the mind that wanders, nature is not a background. It's a collaborator, a mirror, a teacher. It teaches in silence, and its lessons are not linear. You don't leave a forest walk with bullet points or conclusions. You leave with a feeling, a sensation of something having shifted, quietly, deeply, without you needing to explain exactly how. This is why some of the most meaningful daydreams happen not in bed or in boredom, but while walking under trees, staring at clouds, or sitting beside water. These spaces activate the imagination without forcing it. They allow your mind to return to its natural rhythm, not rushed, not rigid, but cyclical, like the tides, like the seasons, like breath. In these moments, your daydreams are not detours, they are returns. To yourself, to the world, to the deeper intelligence that speaks in images and symbols, not in schedules and statistics. So when you feel stuck, restless, uninspired, go outside, not to achieve something, but to receive something. Let your mind wander through the branches and the breezes. Let your thoughts take on the shape of clouds or the slow movement of shadows across the grass. Let the wind write its own story inside you, not one you have to understand right away, but one that you'll carry with you quietly into everything you do. Because the daydream that begins in nature never really ends. It lives on in the way you see the world when you return, more spacious, more curious, more alive. Inside the architecture of the human brain lies something truly remarkable, a kind of endless curiosity, a hunger for understanding that goes far beyond survival. It doesn't just want to know what is directly in front of it or what is useful in the moment. It wants to find meaning. It wants to connect dots, even if they stretch across years, ideas, memories, or worlds that have never touched before. And when the mind is free to wander, not pulled by urgency or task, but allowed to move softly, aimlessly, it begins to engage one of its most powerful gifts, pattern recognition. At first glance, a daydream may seem random. You're thinking about something that happened last week, then drifting into a scene from a movie you saw years ago, then imagining what it would be like to live in a quiet mountain cabin. But beneath this apparent randomness, the brain is doing something highly organized. It is linking. It's noticing similarities between situations, recalling emotional textures, drawing associations between symbols and experiences, and slowly constructing invisible bridges between them. These connections might be emotional, metaphorical, visual, or even spiritual, but they are real. And they shape how you understand your life. This is what the brain loves. Patterns. It's built to find them. It's always searching for structure, for rhythm, for harmony in the chaos. And during daydreaming, when the pressure of problem solving is removed, that process becomes even more fluid. Your brain doesn't need to be told where to look. It simply begins following threads, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, weaving them into something that resonates on a deeper level. A song that reminds you of a person, a quote that lines up perfectly with something you just lived through, a half-forgotten dream that now seems oddly prophetic. The more space you give your mind to wander, the more intricate those patterns become. Over time, you start to notice things others miss. You begin to sense the emotional tone behind people's words. You catch glimpses of the symbolic meaning in your own behaviors. You hear echoes of old stories in new conversations. And without realizing it, you're decoding your own life, not in a cold, analytical way, but in a poetic, intuitive one. Some of the most insightful realizations emerge in these moments of open-ended wandering. You might be thinking about something completely unrelated, brushing your teeth, folding clothes, watching birds, when suddenly a phrase comes into your head, or a memory surfaces that connects perfectly to a question you've been asking yourself. The connection feels like it appears out of nowhere, but it didn't. It was being built quietly in the background, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The mind had been stitching it together, not with logic, but with intuition. Intuition is often described as knowing without knowing how. And that's exactly what daydreaming nurtures. It creates the space where the subconscious can speak, where the mind can experiment with new combinations of thoughts and feelings without needing to justify or explain them. In this way, daydreaming is like a slow-burning creative process, not one you control, but one you trust. You don't chase the insight, you allow it to come to you, and it often arrives in the most unexpected ways. Even creativity itself is grounded in this ability to recognize and reorganize patterns. A painter doesn't just copy what they see, they interpret it, finding harmony between shape and light, texture and feeling. A writer links emotions to words, story arcs to universal truths. A scientist sees the same data as others, but asks a different question, one that reveals a hidden connection. All of this relies on pattern recognition, and it's not something that can be forced. It has to emerge, quietly, slowly, often through wandering. The irony is that our culture often prioritizes structured thinking above all else. We are praised for efficiency, for directness, for staying on track. But true insight doesn't always follow a straight line. It loops, it doubles back, it connects things that seem unrelated. And that's what daydreaming gives you. The permission to let your thoughts roam without needing to explain why. Have you ever had a moment where a symbol keeps showing up in your life? A word, a color, an animal, a number, and it feels like it means something? It probably does. Not in a superstitious way, but in a deeply personal one. Your brain is responding to a resonance you might not yet understand. It's pointing you toward a thread that matters. And if you follow that thread through daydreams, reflections, soft attention, it often leads somewhere meaningful. In these quiet moments, you may begin to sense that your life itself is a pattern, not a rigid one, but a kind of tapestry, woven from the people you've met, the emotions you've felt, the questions you've asked again and again. Daydreaming allows you to step back and see that tapestry, to realize that nothing was truly random, that each piece, even the painful ones, had its place, had its color, had its rhythm. This awareness brings something more than understanding. It brings peace, because once you begin to see the patterns in your thoughts, your memories, your dreams, you stop feeling lost in the randomness of experience. You start to feel connected, rooted, carried even, like life has been speaking to you in a language only you can decode. And your daydreams, those strange, drifting little journeys, are part of how you listen. And the more you listen, the more the world begins to speak. A conversation overheard on the bus connects to a dream from 2 nights ago. A line from a book echoes something your friend said last year. A childhood memory returns just when you need its lesson. These aren't coincidences, they're patterns, and you're not imagining them, you're noticing them. You're participating in the quiet art of meaning-making, the very process that makes life feel rich, soulful, and full of wonder. This is the gift of a mind that's allowed to wander. It becomes a mirror for the universe's complexity. It reflects back not just what is, but what matters. It finds coherence in the chaos, beauty in the disarray. And in doing so, it reminds you that your thoughts, no matter how strange or scattered they may seem, are part of something much bigger, something that knows exactly where to go when given the freedom to move. History remembers them by the books they wrote, the theories they proposed, the inventions they built, and the revolutions they sparked. But before any of those visible achievements existed, there were moments of silence, long stretches of solitude, of wandering, of drifting thought. Many of the world's most influential figures were not just thinkers or leaders. They were daydreamers. Their greatness didn't arise in constant activity, but in the quiet, often overlooked spaces where their minds were free to roam. And in those spaces, something extraordinary happened. They began to see what others could not. There is a long and rich history of daydreamers who changed the world. Albert Einstein is perhaps one of the most iconic. Known for his theory of relativity, his contributions to quantum mechanics, and his groundbreaking reimagining of space and time, Einstein often credited his insights not to textbooks or laboratory work, but to his imagination. He famously said that imagination is more important than knowledge. As a child, he would sit and imagine himself riding alongside a beam of light, and it was through that mental experiment, a kind of lucid daydream, that he would later formulate ideas that redefined physics. His discoveries didn't come from constant focus, but from mental play, from drifting into the unknown and staying there long enough to make it feel like home. Then there was Nikola Tesla, whose mind was a theater of invention. He claimed that he could see his designs in such vivid detail during daydreams that he didn't need to sketch them out or test them through prototypes. Instead, he would build and perfect his machines entirely in his imagination, adjusting pieces in his mind, watching them function with precision before ever touching the real materials. His mind wasn't bound by the limits of external reality. It wandered freely, And in that wandering, he uncovered what had never been seen before. Writers, too, are often masters of mental drifting. Take Virginia Woolf, whose introspective lyrical prose captured the subtle textures of consciousness like no one before her. Her narratives often mimic the flow of thought itself, not linear, but fluid, dreamlike, filled with sudden jumps and quiet revelations. She wrote of the lighthouse beam of consciousness sweeping over different inner landscapes, and her work often feels like a transcription of the daydreaming mind. Her solitude was not loneliness. It was a fertile space where imagination and observation met, where she could listen to the murmur of her own thoughts and translate them into stories that echo across generations. And then there's Leonardo da Vinci, the ultimate Renaissance mind. His notebooks are filled not just with inventions and anatomical drawings, but with musings, questions, strange metaphors, and fantastical ideas. He once spent hours watching how water swirled in a stream, or how birds moved in flight. These weren't distractions. They were sacred observations, invitations for the mind to drift and dream. He combined art, science, and philosophy, not because he followed a curriculum, but because his imagination had no borders. His daydreams didn't serve a single purpose. They served possibility. These are only a few names in a long line of visionaries who trusted their inner drift. Poets like Emily Dickinson, who spent much of her life in isolation, crafted entire emotional universes in the stillness of her room. Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, who walked for hours each day, letting his thoughts ferment in rhythm with his footsteps. Composers like Ludwig van Beethoven, who would walk through the countryside, humming melodies that would later become symphonies. Their genius wasn't squeezed from their brains in moments of high stress. It bloomed in the spaces they allowed themselves to enter, spaces where the mind could wander freely, unapologetically, and deeply. What unites these minds isn't just intelligence or talent, it's permission. They gave themselves permission to drift, to imagine without needing an immediate outcome, to explore thoughts that made no sense at first, but later revealed profound truths. They understood that brilliance doesn't always announce itself with a flash. Sometimes it arrives slowly, like mist rolling in from the sea, forming ideas grain by grain until they become something you can touch. In our own lives, we are often told that greatness requires discipline, deadlines, precision. And yes, there is value in structure, but there is also value in drift, in staring out the window, in letting your thoughts float without asking them to land. The world of daydreaming, the one inhabited by so many great minds, is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's a room where you meet the unknown parts of yourself, where you rehearse the future, where you mourn the past, where you ask the questions no one taught you how to ask. And perhaps that's why so many truly original thinkers seem slightly strange to those around them. Their attention didn't follow the usual routes. They were often lost in thought, slow to answer, forgetful of time and appointments. But inside, their minds were mapping whole new territories. While others were navigating what already existed, they were inventing what didn't. There's a quiet rebellion in this, in allowing your mind to go off script, in not apologizing for wandering, in trusting that something meaningful may come not in the moment you push hardest, but in the moment you soften your grip and let your imagination take the lead. This is what the daydreamers of history remind us. That greatness isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like effort. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like silence, like sitting in a chair, looking out a window, while the real work happens somewhere behind the eyes. And the beauty is, you don't need to be a genius to enter that space. You don't need to write theories or invent machines. You only need to stop for a moment and listen. Listen to where your thoughts want to go when they're not being pulled. Watch what images arise when the noise of the world fades. Let yourself be led not by logic, but by wonder. The same kind of wonder that led Einstein to light, Wolf to consciousness, Tesla to the electric pulse of the future. You are not separate from them. You are made of the same material, a mind capable of dreaming, connecting, drifting, discovering. The only question is whether you'll give yourself the same permission they did, to wander far enough into your own mind that you begin to find the pieces of the world no one else can see. There's a quiet magic that happens when the mind begins to wander, a shift that pulls you inward, and yet at the same time opens you up to something greater than yourself. Many people experience daydreaming as a personal, even private act, and it is. It's a retreat into the soft interior of your own thoughts, memories, and fantasies. But beneath that personal experience lies something much deeper, something spiritual, a doorway into the unknown, a meeting place between the conscious and the unconscious, the known and the unknowable. Daydreaming, in its most profound form, can become a kind of spiritual practice. Unlike meditation, which often emphasizes stillness and the quieting of thought, daydreaming allows thought to flow freely. It doesn't require discipline or control. It requires surrender. You don't sit down with an intention to reach some transcendent state. You simply let go, and in doing so, your mind begins to travel. Not with the force of effort, but with the ease of drift. And in that drifting, something sacred often begins to emerge. You might not notice it at first. You might be thinking about an old friend, or replaying a conversation, or imagining a place you've never been. But then, unexpectedly, your thoughts begin to take on a new shape. Symbols start to appear, a door, a river, a bird. Emotions rise from nowhere and seem to speak louder than words. And if you stay with the moment, if you let the mind move through it, you begin to feel something beyond the content of the daydream. You begin to sense the meaning beneath it. In spiritual traditions across time and culture, this kind of imagery and intuitive flow is considered a gateway, not just to creativity, but to deeper wisdom. Jung called it the realm of the archetypes. Mystics called it the inner vision. Shamans called it the dream time. It is the space where the personal and the collective unconscious overlap, where symbols speak louder than facts, and where the soul, however you define it, begins to reveal itself. In this space, daydreaming becomes more than mental noise. It becomes a language, a way for something deep within you to speak without restriction. You may find yourself imagining a journey, walking through a forest, entering a temple, climbing a mountain. You may not know where these images come from, but they feel true. They stir something inside you. They carry emotional weight, and often they stay with you, not as mere thoughts but as experiences, felt deeply, remembered vividly, revered quietly. These experiences are not accidental. They are your inner world making itself visible. And if you begin to treat daydreaming not as a distraction, but as a kind of sacred listening, something changes. You start to respect your inner imagery. You start to pay attention to the emotions that rise and fall without reason. You start to trust the mysterious process that unfolds when you stop steering and start allowing. And with that trust comes something rare: insight. Not the kind of insight that arrives from thinking hard, but the kind that arrives when you touch something deeper than thought. You may suddenly understand why you felt distant from someone, or what a recurring dream really means, or what decision you've been avoiding, even though it's been quietly pulling on you for weeks. These insights don't crash into you. They rise, like fog lifting off a lake, revealing what was always there beneath the surface. In this way, daydreaming becomes an invitation to listen, to feel, to follow. It can lead you to forgotten memories, unresolved emotions, buried desires. It can guide you into the heart of your own longing. And sometimes, in the stillness between thoughts, it can even connect you to something beyond yourself, to a sense of the sacred, the infinite, the divine. Many people describe having spiritual experiences during quiet, drifting moments. A sudden feeling of peace while staring at the sky. A sense of being deeply loved for no reason at all. A vision of something beautiful and mysterious that leaves them speechless. These are not hallucinations. They are glimpses, openings, and often they happen not during peak effort or religious ritual, but in the soft space of reverie, when the mind is untethered and the soul can speak. This is why artists, poets, and mystics often describe their inspiration as coming from somewhere else, not because it literally comes from outside of them, but because it feels larger than the self. Daydreaming, in its most profound form, connects you to that largeness. It opens a channel. It reminds you that you are not just a collection of thoughts and memories, but part of something greater, a living, breathing mystery that speaks in symbols, images, and feelings. Even the most ordinary daydream can contain a thread of the sacred. A vision of yourself walking down a different road. A sudden longing for a place you've never seen. A memory of someone you loved, appearing with clarity and warmth. These moments aren't random. They're messages, echoes of your deeper self. Invitations to pay attention, not to the noise of the world, but to the quiet wisdom inside you. And in honoring these moments, you begin to change your relationship with yourself. You stop dismissing your imagination as childish. You stop treating your drifting thoughts as distractions. You begin to see your inner world not as a fog to escape, but as a landscape to explore, a sacred terrain filled with meaning, with healing, with guidance. If only you are willing to enter it gently and listen with care. Daydreaming, then, becomes a form of inner pilgrimage. You don't need a map. You don't need a destination. You only need the willingness to wander, to drift, to let go of the need to control. And in that letting go, you find not emptiness, but presence. Not confusion, but clarity. Not boredom, but awe. Because the spiritual dimension of daydreaming is not about escaping reality. It's about remembering that reality is deeper than it seems. That beneath the surface of your daily thoughts and routines, there is an ocean of meaning. And that your mind, when it wanders, often swims in that ocean without even realizing it. So if you've ever felt that a quiet moment of drifting thought carried something sacred, it did. If you've ever felt that your imagination was showing you something important, it was. If you've ever returned from a daydream feeling more whole, more open, more alive, you weren't imagining it. You were remembering something ancient, something eternal, something within you that speaks in whispers and waits for you to listen. There comes a moment, often unnoticed, when a person who once felt scattered begins to find coherence. When the thoughts that once drifted aimlessly like autumn leaves in the wind begin to arrange themselves into something more than noise, something like a rhythm, something like a path. That moment doesn't usually come with fanfare. It arrives in quiet, in the spaces between distractions, in the calm that follows a long breath or the pause after a long walk. And more often than not, it's daydreaming that gets you there. Because daydreaming, though dismissed by many as mental wandering, is often the very thing that brings your life into focus. It is not a failure to pay attention. It is a way of paying attention to what truly matters. What you daydream about, again and again, tells you something essential about your inner life, your longings, your fears, your questions, your unspoken hopes. And over time, if you begin to listen carefully, those images and stories and imagined futures begin to point toward a center, a self, a thread of identity running quietly beneath the surface of everything. That is the great irony. While daydreaming is often seen as a drifting away from yourself, it is, in fact, one of the most powerful ways to return. When you allow your mind to wander without judgment, you create the space for truths to rise. Not facts necessarily, but emotional truths, soul truths, the kind you can't force, but only discover, slowly, gently, in your own time. And in that process, something even deeper begins to unfold. Not just a sense of identity, but a sense of purpose. A quiet knowing that your life is not random, that the themes that appear in your daydreams, the scenes, the symbols, the recurring feelings, are not meaningless. They are messages. They are mirrors. They are parts of you that have been trying to speak and are finally being heard. You might start to notice patterns, that you always daydream about helping others, or about creating something, or escaping something, or becoming someone you aren't yet, but could be. These aren't just fantasies. They are glimpses of the life that wants to emerge through you. They are clues from your deeper self, the self that exists beneath the expectations, the roles, the noise. And the more you listen to these inner visions, the more your outer life begins to change. Not in sudden dramatic ways, but in subtle, lasting ones. You begin to move toward things that feel aligned. You say yes to opportunities that reflect what you've imagined. You begin to create space for what once only existed in your dreams. Slowly, your daydreams begin to take shape in the real world, not because you chased them, but because you followed their direction. In this way, daydreaming becomes a compass, not one that points north, but one that points inward. It guides you not with logic, but with resonance, with emotion, with the deep hum of recognition you feel when you imagine something that feels right. Even if it scares you, even if it makes no sense to anyone else. That hum is your true self speaking, and daydreaming is how it finds its voice. For some, this process leads to a creative awakening. They begin to write, or paint, or build something they've longed to make. For others, it leads to clarity about relationships, who they want to be with, or who they need to let go of. For others still, it leads to a deeper spiritual understanding, a connection to something greater, to a life that is not just about survival, but about meaning. And for many, It brings peace, a soft sense of being in the right place, even if that place is uncertain. Because that's the quiet gift of daydreaming. It helps you make peace with not knowing. It teaches you that the answers don't have to come immediately, that your life doesn't have to follow a straight line, that your purpose isn't something you have to chase. It's something you remember, and often you remember it not by thinking harder, but by letting go, by trusting the images that arise when you stop trying to be productive and start listening to the deeper current within you. This is why so many people who reconnect with daydreaming after years of pushing it aside describe it as a kind of homecoming, a return to the imaginative freedom of childhood, a return to authenticity. Because when you were young, you daydreamed freely, not because it was useful, but because it felt good, because it felt true. And somewhere along the way, you were told to stop, to grow up, to be practical. But that part of you never died. It just went quiet, waiting for your permission to speak again. And when it does, you begin to see yourself more clearly. Not as the version shaped by expectation, but as the version that's always been there. The one you meet in the quiet moments, in the imagined conversations, in the future scenes that flash before your mind's eye. That version of you is wise, whole, worth listening to. And the more you listen, the more your life begins to reflect that wholeness. So daydream, not as an escape, but as a practice, as a way of remembering, as a way of becoming. Let your mind drift and trust where it goes. Let your thoughts wander and trust what they reveal. Because within every wandering path, there is a destination. Within every imagined life, there is a truth. And within you, right now, there is a story waiting to be lived. One that only daydreaming has the key to unlock. As we come to the end of this journey through the drifting, luminous world of daydreaming, take a moment to notice what's stirring inside you. Maybe a memory, maybe an idea, maybe just a feeling, soft, unformed, but real. That's the beauty of the wandering mind. It doesn't always give you answers. Sometimes it simply opens a door. In a world that glorifies busyness and constant productivity, daydreaming can feel like rebellion. But it's the gentlest kind, a quiet return to your inner world, a reconnection with your deeper self. And perhaps the most important thing your brain does, not because it's efficient, but because it's honest. So the next time your mind drifts while you stare out a window, or while you're walking without a destination, don't rush to pull it back. Let it go. Let it speak. Let it show you the things your conscious mind may have forgotten. You might be surprised by what you find in the spaces between thoughts. And now, I want to ask you, what's one daydream that changed the way you see your life? Or perhaps, what do you find yourself daydreaming about again and again? Share it in the comments below, not just for you, but for someone else who may need to see it too. Until next time, take care of your inner world. It's where the real journey begins.